Bhaskar Chakravorti is at the Fletcher School at Tufts, where he is Dean of Global Business. He's involved with a number of different efforts to take advantage of and track digital readiness and capability and ideas around the world. He's very digitally savvy, and I've asked him to sort of take some work he was doing about the future of the United States and how technology could play a bigger role, and convert it into recommendations for the Biden administration. So Bhaskar, please go ahead and take it away. You can share your screen, I think, and show us what you got.
Fantastic. Dave, thank you for having me, and I hope you can hear me loud and clear, and
yes, we can
see me. So I'm
loud and clear and see you.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So let me share my screen just as a bit of table setting for the conversation that we're going to have. And we're going to have a chat, but before the chat, I'd like to share a bit of data and some perspectives with you. And then we can have a conversation about what should be a tech policy proposal for the incoming administration. So here's Joe Biden, who is probably one of the biggest tech paradoxes. The first American presidential candidate to have run a socially distanced campaign, predicated on the notion that people can somehow see his face and hear his words or read about whatever he has said or done using some form of technology. And yet the guy is remarkably low tech. His Twitter following is not the passionate following that one considers de rigueur for modern politics. He barely uses technology, and if you ask him about technology, you get basically kind of vague answers, like I don't usually Google myself. Or you ask him about some of the hot button issues, antitrust. Well, that's something we should take a hard look at, which is kind of saying nothing. Section 230, which currently gives immunity to social media platforms for the content that they carry, and a lot of discussion about what to do about it. His response should be revoked immediately. Okay. About tech bigwigs, he says not everyone in the tech industry is a bad guy, and occasionally he also calls them little creeps. At the same time, here's a guy who has actually chosen for his VP somebody who is directly out of Silicon Valley. Kamala Harris is a former attorney general and lawyer, but very close to Silicon Valley. His transition team is full of tech people. Joe Biden is a tech paradox and a tech enigma, which means that people are spending a ton of time right now speculating on what is he going to do about all these big hot button tech issues, which continue to remain in the headlines and continue to dominate our consciousness, not just because we're tech obsessed, but because we're using technology all the time, because God damn it, we don't have an option, whether it is for work or play or spending, the whiling away the hours in the evening, we're relying on our screens. So technology is ever present. And what is Joe Biden going to do about all this? It turns out that the man doesn't really care a whole lot about technology, because what he cares about is COVID. He cares about the economy. He cares about race. He cares about climate. So all of us who are tech obsessed, who keep asking, what is he going to do about big tech? Does he really hate Mark Zuckerberg the way he has said in the past? What is he going to do about Section 230? These are asking the wrong questions. For the first 100 days, when Joe Biden gets inaugurated as the next president of the US, he's going to have 4 major priorities. And it's actually said that these are my 4 major priorities. So we should be asking 2 questions. What role does technology play in exacerbating or potentially adding to the challenges in these 4 areas? And what can technology do to help solve problems in these 4 areas? That's where his eyes and attention is going to be in the first 100 days. So if I were to just sort of think about this, technology is underneath each of those areas, whether it's COVID or economy or race relations or climate. And to give you a sense of where the United States is in the global tech landscape, we just released a study yesterday called Digital in a Time of COVID. And we studied 90 countries around the world. And I will give you the links to go and check the site out. There's an interactive policy and decision-making simulator. You can play with it and come up with all kinds of funky scenarios in terms of what you can do or not do about tech, about innovation, about regulation, and so on and so forth. And we found that there are some interesting connections between technological innovation or digital evolution and your ability to maintain some form of economic resilience through the pandemic. So here's a quick graph. On the vertical, I've got a measure of economic resilience. As you go further north, the more resilient your economy is. Horizontal, as you go from left to right, the more evolved is your state of digital evolution. And here are a whole bunch of countries. These are not the all 90 countries. I've just put all the countries for which we had comparable data. And you can see where the United States is relative to the rest of the world. And what you can also see, and there's a kind of a third color here, which basically shows how successful the country was in maintaining social distancing, in getting people to stay at home and not mingle with each other. And you can see that all the countries that actually did a pretty poor job in maintaining social distancing, which are the darker colors, are also at the bottom of the chart. So they did, actually it's the other way around. The ones that did a good job in maintaining social distancing are also the ones that are more economically resilient. But the more important point I want you to focus on is that the more digitally evolved states, such as the United States and Singapore, New Zealand, Norway, South Korea, actually did pretty well in terms of economic resilience. So that should make us feel pretty good. We are walking into a new administration with a pretty strong technology evolution in hand. And even though our economy sucks, we are actually doing better than large parts of the world. But unfortunately, as you go look deeper, the United States of America looks a little bit like the United Mess of America. Let me pose a few questions and I'll show you again a few pieces of data just to situate us. Let's ask the question, how successful were we in keeping our people at home during the pandemic? I can show you this data county by county, but let me show you state by state. All the red colors means we did a terrible job in keeping people at home. The lighter red, slightly better. Lighter green, slightly better. And the dark green, much better. You can see a massive difference depending on where you live in the United States in terms of how good and how disciplined we were in keeping people at home. And a large part of that has to do with how the state political establishments and other establishments performed and how the residents responded to orders from the top. Another question, really important for us as we're talking about technology, which states were digitally ready to facilitate all kinds of activities from home, whether it's working from home or doing other activities from home? Again, you can see the answer depends on where you live. Red states, not so good. Slightly less fading red states, a little bit better. A little bit better, and the states that did much, much better. Again, you can see a pattern repeating itself in terms of which parts of the country are better off in maintaining social distancing, keeping people at home, and continuing to maintain some semblance of normalcy using technology. How about a few other things that we really, really care about? Our kids at home. How enabled are they to shift to online learning? It turns out all over the map. The reds, not so good. The greens, much better. And those slashes that I've got, those are the places where the public health officials have said, no way are you going to open your schools. Keep your kids at home because you're doing a terrible job at maintaining the contagion. What about telehealth? If I've got a spot on my nose, I'm scared to go into the hospital. I just want a dermatologist to take a look at my nose. Can I actually get on a screen and talk to my dermatologist? Depends on where you live. If you're green, pretty good. If you're not green, you're kind of screwed. How successful were states in keeping people at home and containing the virus? You can actually put these two elements together. The vertical captures how successful you are at keeping people at home and keeping them productively engaged through work, school, and other things. So that's digital readiness on the vertical. And on the horizontal is how successful you are in maintaining the disease. And you can see there's a very clear connection between digital readiness and COVID response readiness. Here's another interesting measure. I could keep going. I'm just going to throw one more. Digital readiness on the vertical and on the horizontal, how vulnerable are you to all kinds of crap coming at you through the social media platforms? Misinformation vulnerability. We actually measured that, and we found that it depends on where you live and who you are and which part of the demographic you are in. So it suggests that there are vast differences across the United States in terms of digital readiness, access to online schools, access to health, access to COVID response. And by the way, these differences are not just in terms of where you live, but what your skin color is, what your ethnicity is. This is a map that actually shows the difference between white households, Black households, and Hispanic households. And the bluer you are, the more digitally connected you are, the red or oranger you are, not so good. You can see the Blacks and the Hispanics are not doing too well across the United States. That's why I call it the united mess of America, which is the country that Joe Biden is going to become the president of in January 2021. So he's got a big challenge in front of him. The first step in his challenge is to figure out how big is the digital gap? How big is the digital gap? The FCC commissioner, the chairman of the FCC is just stepping down, Ajit Pai. You ask him, how many people don't have broadband in the United States? He will pull out a big file from the FCC and he'll say 21 million. The actual number is a little bit larger than 21 million. According to Microsoft, a company that should kind of know how many people are actually using broadband because they've got devices all over the place. It's 162 million. Almost half of this country does not have proper access to the internet, which is crazy given what we are living through and we will be living through for the next little while. And even after the vaccine, these behaviors are going to stick. So Digital Joe, first 100 days, has got a bunch of things in front of him. Get a firm handle on how big the gap is. And that is going to drive how much money he needs to go to Congress for. Currently, he's budgeted 20 billion. That is based on that old FCC wrong number of 21 billion or 21 million people without broadband access. That budget is way off. And there's no way that Mitch McConnell is going to give him that money. And he needs to come back with better data. Second, learn from the global leaders. The United States is doing well on a whole bunch of things, but it is not that hot in terms of providing government services and public services digitally. Learn from the best of the best because we ought to be there. We invented this digital technology. We've got to be able to get up there with the big boys like Estonia, like New Zealand, like Singapore, and figure out how to translate that into the states of the US. This translates into working with state governments, with governors, with mayors in how to solve the problem at a local and state level. This is not going to happen at a national level. At a national level, we'll be setting the frameworks, providing budgets, and then at a state by state level, we'll have to solve problems. And then we need bipartisan action. This is likely to be a divided government or close to a divided government. The one thing that Republicans and Democrats agree on is that they both agree on reining in the power of big tech. Well, this is the time. Use your leverage on big tech to get them to do two things. One, solve the broadband access gap. It turns out Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, all of them have internet access businesses, internet access units as part of their companies. Let's figure out how to get their help in closing the broadband gap to the extent we can. And that other issue of climate change, it turns out that all these companies have enormous power to make a massive difference to the carbon contribution of the United States. And they're already taking some big steps. They've made some bold moves in terms of going negative carbon to zero carbon in the next couple of decades. Let's use that leverage so that they can in turn get the rest of the economy to turn. And finally, invest in areas that are beyond just pure digital readiness. We need to believe in each other. This is not just about technology. Citizens need to believe in their government. They need to trust in these institutions. Children need to have decent childcare at home. They need to have decent education at home so that when the parent is working at home, because guess what, their offices haven't opened or they can't go back because behaviors have changed, at least the children are being taken care of, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of things that surround the digital ecosystem. And somebody like Joe Biden is a good start because he can help rebuild that sense of a social contract, and then make the kinds of investments that are necessary at a national level and at a local level to enable people to be able to bring technology into their lives and bring their lives into technology. And that is the first 100-day agenda that I would recommend for the Biden administration. After that, you can take on all the big hairy issues of whether to follow through with the antitrust lawsuits against Google and Facebook, or what to do about Section 230, what to do about net neutrality, what about data privacy, big hairy issues. That's going to take some time, and it's going to take a certain amount of education on for Joe Biden. But for the first 100 days, here is what we need. Back to you, Dave.
Great, Bhaskar. You know, I really love the perspective, and I think it was a really important one for our audience to get. The idea that the main task technologically for Biden is not whether to break up the tech companies, it's to use technology to solve the country's problems, which is really beautifully thought through. And this notion of digital readiness and broadening connectivity and making everyone a participant, particularly regarding education, healthcare. You know, you didn't dwell deep in those two, but obviously we've talked about that repeatedly here at Techonomy. We had a session on this yesterday as well, that the urgent need to get people connected and all the benefits that will flow from that. So, you know, kudos to you for putting it in this light and getting rid of all this relatively esoteric and often implausible regulatory actions. You know, it's funny, both Trump and Biden say they want to eliminate 230, and Trump's now supposedly holding up the military budget to eliminate 230. But, you know, if 230 was eliminated, essentially Facebook, Google, Amazon would shut down. These companies cannot operate without Section 230. There's not even a world one can imagine where it could go away and we wouldn't see shockingly radical changes in the nature of the internet economy. So there's a lot of misinformation being bandied around. I wanted to ask you one quick thing too. Stav Shafir, I don't know, you heard the end of her session when she was talking about, you know, her belief is that the way to combat disinformation from demagogues on the internet and conspiracy theories is to make the positive side of using technology for democracy as exciting as the negative side. And she specifically said government needs to invest in technology for democracy. Does that idea resonate with you?
I completely agree that the government needs to invest in technology for democracy, promoting democracy, promoting, as I mentioned, faith in the social contract. And these things sort of go together. But I fear that the misinformation stuff, whether it is just pure wrong stuff or made up stuff or just fun stuff, you know, salacious information travels further and faster digitally than all the other good stuff. You could come up with lots of wonderful and interesting things about democracy and you know, how we should believe in our communities and our neighbors, but that's kind of, or you know, increasingly, we're going to be worried about public health, vaccines, and so on. False news about democracy, about vote rigging, or you know, ballot boxes being thrown out. That's much more fun to share. More people like it, and that spreads faster. That's the reality. So we have to live with the reality that the bad stuff is going to travel further and faster, and you've got to figure out how to counter it.
We definitely got to figure out how to conquer that. So we are out of time, but I love that you gave this presentation. A number of people are asking for the slides. So can you post in the chat to everyone where to get the slides or where to see some version of this, or get us your slides and we can get them to everyone after the fact, post them on our website?
Absolutely. So what I'll do is I will send you. Yeah, I will send you the slides, Dave, and then you can send it around to people, and let me add a site to go to. Basically, the best way my computer is frozen.
Yeah, we've had a little trouble getting you. Your video keeps freezing, but we've heard most of your words, luckily. So put it in the chat. Thank you, Bhaskar. And now we're going to go to our yoga break, but Really appreciate your helping us today and stay part of the Techonomy community. Thanks, Bhaskar.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.